Hello, my name is Dan Humberg and I'm representing HarvestFires.com. This is an instructional video that will help you with the installation of the tin kit for a Firestop system. In this case it's on a CaseIH model 9240 combine. The same exhaust system is carried over into the 9250, so this video will be used both to serve for installation of the tin kit on a 9240 and a 9250. Before we begin looking at the machine itself, I always give this quick cautionary statement. The Firestop kit is designed to prevent the ignition of volatile dust, particularly as we see in sunflowers when that dust encounters the hot components of the exhaust system at the turbocharger, the exhaust manifold, and the first piece of the exhaust system after the turbo, right up to, in this case, right up to the diesel oxidation catalyst. It's very effective at doing that. It isolates that area and keeps it flooded with fresh, clean air so that we don't have any dust there and we don't get the chronic ignition of dust that causes so many smolders on your machines and sunflowers. However, I cannot guarantee that you will never ever have a fire or a smolder on your combine. You can ignite dust from a variety of different locations and sources. You can have a hot bearing, you can have a alternator failing, you can throw a spark from an electrical short, you can have friction, whatever that can cause fires and smolders. And so although this system is effective at what it's intended to do, I don't want to imply that you will never ever have a smolder on your machine, so you still need to be vigilant, and it certainly doesn't hurt to keep the machine clean and watch it. Having said that, let's start with the installation and look at the machine. First, I have a couple things to point out before we begin putting any tin on. I'm sitting in what I call the hole. It's the space between the engine and the grain tank. It seems to get smaller on every version of the combine I get onto, but anyway, the exhaust manifold runs my left to right. That's radiator end over to my left, your left, and from this viewpoint to the right to the far end of the engine. This is the turbocharger itself here. There's a pneumatic actuator on the turbocharger that probably manages boost pressure. We'll have to work around that. And they have this first part of the exhaust pipe after the turbocharger that has an actuator in it now and a kind of a choke that manages back pressure and manages temperature in your exhaust system. And this is probably going to make sure that the system runs hot enough so that it doesn't produce any soot or black smoke. Then that exhaust turns and comes up what I call this riser pipe and comes into the diesel oxidation catalyst, this stainless steel thing that probably also serves as your muffler, but it's also a diesel oxidation catalyst and a point for them to inject the DEF into the diesel exhaust fluid into the exhaust stream. We're going to enclose the exhaust system right up to this component. I have operated under the assumption that the diesel oxidation catalyst, the outside of it here, does not get hot enough to ignite the dust. If I'm wrong, someday we may end up enclosing all or part of that thing as well. But right now we're going to bring the tin up to this can and stop there. But we would like it to fit tight up to that canister. I want to point out a couple things that you could have to do on your machine to do this installation. I'm looking just to the left of the turbo on the exhaust manifold. There is a bellows here. It's an expansion joint that allows expansion and contraction with temperature in the exhaust manifold. There are two clamps, stainless steel clamps, one on the left and the side, that join this piece and this piece together with that bellows. Sometimes, depending on how they assembled it or whatever, you may see the hex head bolts that tighten these clamps out here on the outside vertically. It may make it easier for them to assemble. In the case of the machine I'm on right now, they're on the bottom. They're back underneath and on the bottom and pointed towards the block. And that's good. In my case, that's where they need to be. The space between, this is your compressor turbine housing for the turbocharger that compresses your fresh air, and the space between that and this clamp is about 1/4 of an inch, and our tin kit needs to run through that space. So if those clamps are not positioned like they are here, you may have to loosen them and tap this with a hammer or whatever to break it loose a little bit and spin it down underneath and retighten them. I don't think it looks like the 9240s probably come that way because there's just very little space here, and I'm not sure they have space for their clamp. On an 8240 and 8250, there's a little more space here, and then they leave these clamps on the outside here closer to me, and they get in the way, and so we spin them around. But you may need to look at that on this side. The other side will be enclosed differently, and we won't need to rotate those clamps. The other one thing I'll point out is that we're going to have some tin that comes up here and encloses this riser pipe up to the diesel oxidation catalyst. On the 8250 that I was on a couple weeks ago, this clamp got in the way of that tin, and so I loosened this clamp, spun the clamp around to the back side and retightened it where I have more space, and there's more space for it back here. I don't think we need to do that on the 9240s, but if you're assembling the tin and we run into this, just understand that you could just loosen that, tap it to make it break it loose, slide it around to the back, or tap it around to the back and then tighten it back up again. So that would prepare us for the tin install. A few other things I'll point out that we're going to have to work around when we get there. These sensor lines that come out the back, kind of the back side of the exhaust system here, we're going to have to make provision to get those out through our enclosure. We're going to have to work around this pneumatic actuator here. We have to work around the turbocharger bearing, and we have to deal with the oil lines that serve that bearing, both the pressure line here that comes up and over and down on top, and the return line that goes straight down out the bottom of the bearing and out the bottom. So those are things that we could have to fit around when we get to that with a tin. I've tried to design the tin so that it accommodates those things, but you need to understand that there's slight variations between the way things get assembled sometimes on the machine, so things are maybe vary a small amount in the position, and the tin may have slight variability, or we may get it just tweaked. Anyway, you could have to modify the tin very slightly in those areas where we want close fits around parts that have to enter and leave the hot enclosure. You're looking at parts number C94001 and C94002. These are the first two we're going to begin with. Okay, we're looking at parts 001 and 002. I've screwed them together already because I believe we can put them in as a set, and that'll save you some effort. I've only put in a few screws on this when I'm assembling it here because I'm on a dealership lot and this kit is going to come right back off. So I'll put enough screws in to hold the piece in place to show the position and talk about it, and then I won't do more than that. I'll take it off when I get done. In your case, I'd put this screw in as well as this one here. The rest we'll put in when it connects to other parts. This piece drops in between the compressed air line here. This is an aluminum housing coming out of the compressor and drops down here, and it will sit on top of a kind of a cast bar or boss on the block, and the tabs on the bottom of it will kind of slip in over the top of that, between that and the head, and it'll sit here. Right now it's loose and I don't have anything to connect it to, so it'll just sit there until we put the next piece in. That's pieces number 1 and 2, and when they're in place they'll bump up against the left end here, will bump up against the block. You may notice things might have a blue cast in your picture. I put one of those blue nylon tarps up above me to kind of shield the sun, otherwise things can tend to wash out in the picture on something and you can't see very well. If the wind starts to blow, it may sound like I'm inside a Frito bag, but never mind, it's just that tarp over the top. So this is piece number 3. It's going to slide down. Turns out it's actually easier to put piece 3 in first and then put 1 and 2 after it. So drop piece 3 down in here between the compressed air fitting here, this aluminum fitting from the compressor and the manifold, and then piece number 1 and 2 can slip down over the end. These will now overlap, and the second one here should sit on top of the tab sticking out on the bottom of part number 2 and inside of this outer tab on part number 2. That way it'll shed dust. The air coming across it will shed dust rather than catch it. Now, if you watch the video on how to fold tin, you saw that little stubby screwdriver that I have that I will provide you with for the kit. When I left this morning and came to this dealership, I neglected to throw in that little stubby screwdriver, so I'm having to put these screws in here by hand. Well, this one I can reach with a driver. some of those that I have to put in by hand, I won't be able to thread them in all the way, but again, for this demonstration, if I can get the screws started so it holds the pieces aligned, then that's all we need to do for this. But you'll need to snug them up. So there's a screw there. There's another one down lower here. In this case, I think I can probably reach that one with this 6-inch hand drive. All right, I've got 2 screws in there, and there are 2 screw holes underneath in the overlapping tabs there as well. I may try and reach under and get one of those. I'll go off camera to do that because it may take me a little while, and I don't have that stubby. That one is typically done. You have to reach in from the right side underneath the neck of that goes up to the turbocharger, and it'll take most of your arm to reach under there from the downstream side of the turbo all the way back under the intake manifold to reach up and get those screws in from the bottom. But you do need to try and get at least one and probably both of those screws in place. Once you have these 2 in front screwed together, if you pull this at all so that these flanges butt up, the screws on the bottom, the holes should line up so that they go in fairly well, particularly if you've assembled the tin on the bench ahead of time. I just got one of those screws started with my fingers underneath here in that flange, and I should add that I was actually able to reach that from directly underneath here by reaching underneath the rubber air line where the incoming air comes from your air filter, and I could reach up underneath there and get that. So that may be easier than reaching under from the right hand side, the turbocharger side. So that's piece 3 in place. The next piece that I'm going to try to slip in place is piece number 6006. C94006 is what it says. It may have a number 6 cut here on the flange. This one's missing that, but there would be an underscore underneath the 6. This piece slides in place like this so that the exhaust manifold is right up here above it, and then it drops down in front 90 degrees and then comes out partway underneath the turbocharger. It has a bunch of pedals cut in it here to go around the pressure line to the oil bearing on the turbocharger. Now I've fitted in place once, and I had to bend some of these pedals down to give it a little more clearance around that line, and I cut several of these little slits back a little farther so that I could bend about 3/8 of an inch down. Now what I do is I try to bend these pedals so that they're parallel to the line and not perpendicular to it, so that we don't get any hard abrasive force against that oil line from the edge of this tin. I don't think the tin would hurt it, but I don't want to ever damage that oil line because that would be bad. Now, getting this piece in place is a challenge. This is probably the orneriest piece to get in there because it has to go underneath this and slip in there, and it's a tight space. So I'm looking at this piece number 6 again. I've actually cut back the slits in here and opened this pedals up to move the place where that oil line goes back here quite a ways. It's probably centered about 1.5 inches away from the outer edge here, and I'm making these pedals come as close together as they possibly can to try to minimize the air loss through this space. What I'm going to suggest is that if you get a kit and it has this configuration and I haven't had a chance to fix it or change it so that it fits that line closer, once you get this piece in place, before you cover it up with other stuff on top here where you can't access it anymore, I would take some of the aluminum foil tape that I'll provide you and cut a strip of it, see if you can't get it to cover like my finger is here, so that we have the oil line coming through here, but we don't have a big gap here to dump air out, because we're putting the air in right up above it here, and a fair amount of the air that we're pumping in here is going to want to go around through that space and leak out. So if we can cover this up with a little bit of that aluminum foil tape, we'll minimize the air loss through that gap. In future cuts or runs of these parts, I will try to move this opening back in farther so that we don't have to butcher it quite as much in order to make it fit. But now this one will fit. And again, I've bent these tabs down so that they're kind of parallel to that line, so they won't scratch it or braid it or cut it when we're in place there. To get this piece in place, if you go over here to the right and you face this opening, turn it about 45 degrees and face it down so that it slides down in there like this. Once it's in there, you can make a turn like I'm doing right now. And once the top tabs slip in place below the manifold, you can slide it right to left, or from your view it's left to right probably. And it'll go behind the turbocharger. There, it fell in place there. And it should slide over the top of the tab on the bottom of this piece number 3 that we put in here. There'll be a hole that should line up. When you get it in the right spot, there should be a pair of holes that line up. And you can reach under from the left, my left, your right, underneath the, I don't know if you can't probably see my finger in there. I'll get you down here soon. There, you might be able to see my finger wiggling. That's in the space between the oil line and the edge here. Right behind my finger, back in there, there's a hole in the flat, the level surface there. We should be able to go up from underneath where my finger is with a screw through there and tie those two pieces, number 3 and number 6, together. There's also a second hole farther back, closer to the block, and you should try and get that one too. I can't reach those right now because I can try by hand. I don't have my little stubby screwdriver to put them in for sure. I'll try and do that though. I was able to get one screw started through the bottom. Goes through the bottom of piece number 3 first, and then it bites into piece number 6, that piece that we slid in, so that was so awkward to get in behind the turbo. There's a second one behind that. You should try to get that to that with that little stubby screwdriver as well. I won't do that for the sake of time right now. I'm going to put one in. Now I've taken the next piece, and the next piece I'm going to work with is number 5. It's going to slide over the top side of the turbocharger bearing and up against the face of the turbocharger compressor housing. That's this right down here. What I've done ahead of time is to pull this rubber line from the pneumatic actuator here. There's a little clamp. Sorry, you can't see that. There's a little clamp right here, and I've loosened that, and then we can pop this off, and that exposes this so that we can slide this piece down on top of the turbocharger bearing, and you can test fit that by sliding that rubber fitting back on there. I just dropped my screwdriver, so I'm headed down to get that. Okay, let's try again. I'm going to try and get a screw in the top hole here, and it'll tie piece number 5 to the front face of piece number 3. Okay, I'll temporarily hold this one in place, piece number 5 in place. The next one is piece number 4. That's going to come up from the bottom and wrap around the bottom side of the turbocharger bearing, and it should fit inside to the turbocharger side of the face of the previous piece we just put on. The pilot holes here are the larger pilot holes, and we're going to try to put the screws in from the inside of this piece to the outside rather than the other way around. This back flange should also fit inside of the face of the piece that we put on before that drops downward there. And that went amazingly easy. Usually means something bad is about to happen. This is the busiest implement dealership I think I've ever been on. Seems like every combine needs to be moved right now, and I'm sure hoping it isn't. They don't pick this one to move. Okay, I got 2 screws in here. One. Sorry, you need to be able to see that. Okay, we've got this pneumatic line that leaves this face right here, and down below it on this side, there, we're looking right behind the turbocharger here, and you can see inside this there are 2 screws, and both of those are, it's possible to put both of those in, and that tends to line this piece up. Now there are 2 matching holes on the far side of this piece behind the turbo, and you can reach at least one of those screws by using a long driver or a driver and an extension and reaching around behind the turbo and underneath the turbocharger neck and putting a screw in there. I may skip that now for the sake of time, but you can get 1 and maybe 2 screws in there to hold the far side of those 2 pieces together. But they should be lined up now because these 2 screws went in. That lines the other end up as well. So that's piece 4 and 5, at least temporarily in place. One thing I'll point out up here on the top where that pneumatic line goes through, right now it's got a little bit of clearance. When we know for sure where that's going to be, when the rest of the pieces come in place, it may be necessary to open this up a little bit to make sure that that line is not touching. I really don't want it to touch the tin around here, but if it does touch the tin, you want it to touch a face of the tin that's flat, not a sharp edge. So we could end up bending some little tabs out to make it sure that that line is protected. But at this point it's still got some movement, and I don't know where it's finally going to end up when we attach the other pieces. The next piece I'm going to work with is number 7. There's 007 written on this one, and there should be a number down here in this big flange. It's kind of missing there right now, but hopefully it's on your kit, shows up there. This one has the cutout in it for the oil return line, and I've already taken a flat-jawed pliers and bent these little petals that were laser cut in there down to the outside, about as deep as the petals are, and I bent them down pretty much 90 degrees. And then I sat down on the transmission here. You can slide this in underneath there and then around that oil line, and then bring it up underneath the bottom of these side pieces here, and it should come up, and we should be able to start screws through there. I don't know if you're going to be able to reach every one of these screws because there's some stuff under there that may get in the way, but the intention is that you can reach under and get at least most of these screws. The outer ones here I know we can reach easily. And then when we bring that up, we should be able to come to the other side, and there should be able to get maybe get a screw in through this one from the outside in too. So I'm going to go try and do that. I'll probably go offline because I don't know that you're going to be able to see it. I'll try and slide it in place here while you're still looking. There, it really slides in place pretty easily. Anyway, and you can see the bottom of it sticking out here. I'll see if I can get you down to where you can see where it goes. Here's that piece. I can slide it in from the side around the oil line, bring it up underneath the other one, and we're ready to screw it in place. Alright, I was able to get that piece onto the bottom with, I put on a couple of screws for now. There's probably more to, or there are many more to be put in, but I'm going to try to put on the minimum now just to do this demonstration. So that's that piece that goes underneath the turbo and extends out a couple inches outside the turbo. The next piece I'm going to put in place is number 9. We may be out of order a little bit, but I'm going to put in number 9. It will go under the right hand, or in your case, where you're looking, the left hand end of the exhaust manifold. It will go with these two tabs will be bent down, and these straight or flat tabs will extend above that casting boss into kind of that slot underneath the manifold, and then this will overlap on top of the piece behind the turbocharger and we should be able to get screws up from underneath and to hold that piece to this one. So I'll show you how to slip that in here. Okay, you're looking down on the exhaust manifold here, and I can bring this one in from the end. It's not too hard to put in there. Okay, that'll sit there, and then I'll see if I can get a screw in place underneath it. There's a cutout on the end of it that will wrap around an oil line that comes up there. So you can see that that little U-shaped cutout that wraps around that oil line. That'll help locate the part. Okay, I want to work next with piece number 8. It's this, I don't know, I call it a filler piece, but it slips in under the turbocharger on my right hand side of the turbocharger. Sits on top of this bottom tray that we've put in place there. It's pretty easy to get the screw in the back corner here, and that'll help line things up. There, I got a second screw in, the third hole in under the bottom. That should line up the rest of the piece. My goal is to get to the front corner of this where there are 3 overlapping pieces. This piece, the piece underneath it, and the piece from behind the turbocharger has a tab that sticks under that. And we want to get it screw through the top 2 into that tab from in the back piece. I'm going to go offline to do that because it'll probably take me 10 minutes. I was able to get that screw in place. You can see it down there in the back behind the turbocharger, that one screw head, and it goes through 3 pieces, ties those together. Kind of important to try and get that one in there before we go on. The next one, I actually had this on before. Is that piece that goes underneath the manifold there. And I got one screw in the back. I had one started in the front, but I lost that one. So I'm just having that one kind of sit there, and I would go underneath if I was putting this on permanently underneath here where my little finger is, and put another screw up from underneath and tighten that one in place. Next piece I want to work with is number 10. It's kind of a inset tray here, and that's going to go, that will come up if you can. I got it out this way. I had it in there and then took it out, so I know it can go in here. You slide it, angle it up from underneath, and then rotate it. That little narrow tab on that top edge of it will go underneath the long piece sitting here, and it'll slide in like more or less like that. The piece on the turbo end of it, the tab on the turbo end of it, should go in front of the piece behind the turbo. There we go. I got it lined up, and I'm going to start a screw here by hand. There's a second one started, cross-threaded but started. There we go. I've got 2 in there. I'm not certain if you'll be able to get it screws in the tab that's down behind the turbo there. The holes are there, they're lined up, but I don't know if you can get a tool in to tighten the screws in place. You might be able to shoot a long driver underneath the right hand edge of the turbo. I have 2 screw holes down here. We're looking down between the manifold and the exhaust pipe after the turbocharger, and here's that actuator that controls this choke. There's 2 screw holes there that will line up that you can put a screw through the top. I've only put 1 in because I think there's a piece that's going to slide underneath there that so we may have a triple layer here, and we may have to pull that screw out to get all 3 of those, but for now it holds that in place. The next piece I'm going to try and put in place is number 11, 011. Should have an 11 on this top flange up here, this narrow, about 1 inch wide flange. Now if we slide him around so that this notch here is at the far end, almost outside of the exhaust can here, or exhaust pipe here, and slip that tab down first, and you may have to force it a little bit under that one there, and it'll slide in. It'll slide behind. It'll slide behind the tab, the vertical tab here in this previous in this vertical face in here. It'll slide behind that one and lay on top of the piece under the manifold. And I've got 3 screw holes here that line up now, and I'll go offline and put those 3 screws in. There are also 3 screw holes in this vertical face. I doubt whether you'll be able to reach all 3 of them. The top one you may be able to reach with a stubby screwdriver. The bottom one you may be able to reach with a long driver underneath the exhaust pipe and reach under there and shoot that one through. 2 out of 3 would work there fine. I was able to put in this screw here, this one here, and I reached underneath with the long driver bit and got one in back in that vertical wall there, and that holds it in place for me. You'd want to put as many others as you can get in. This one you may be able to reach, and this one is easy. Okay, we'll go on to the next piece. There, piece number 19, and I test fit it once, and I'll try and correct this, but you could get a kit that still has this situation. I had to cut about a strip of about 3/16 of an inch right off right here along this second channel or slot that we've got here that fits around as support for the turbo control thing. Anyway, I cut about 3/16 of an inch strip off there to widen this slot just a little bit. Then this goes in, although it's pinched underneath here, and so it slides in kind of hard. Also on the right hand end, I'm going to trim a little piece off here that or bend it. There's a little tab here that I think will be better off aimed up than where it was. Now this slot here with the bent flanges on near the end is going to slip around a support for the exhaust pipe, and these will slip around these posts underneath the exhaust here. I had a screw in a hole back here that I had to pull up and out so that I can get these 2 once I have this in place. I had to pull that one back out of the existing assembly. So now I'm going to slide this down. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, I should be able to see where I'm at here. And behind, outside the turbo here, I'm going to slide it on top of the other stuff that I've got here and in underneath. And it's best to sit down and watch this go. And that's mostly where it's going to go. There, I got a hole lined up here. I'll get a screw in that one to start. Yay. Okay, I don't know if you can see where I'm at putting the screw in. Now I'm between the exhaust and the pipe and the exhaust manifold, and there are 2 screw holes that you can reach from the top, and I got one of them to line up. That's 3 pieces, and that ties a lot of stuff together here, makes this much more rigid and should line up a lot of the other screw holes now. So that piece is in place. The right hand end has got a little bit of wobble, or a little bit, it needs to be fixed a little bit. I hold you in here, you can see that there are screw holes there now, rats. It looks like on this version, I did this different in the 8240, it looks like on this piece, or this version, this tab or piece that I just put in place needs to go in and slide underneath this tab, because the larger toilet holes are on this piece and that should be on top. So I'm going to back out what I did. I'll go offline to save you some time, but I'm going to pull the screws I just put in, slide this piece back out, and slide him back in underneath this so that I can get those screw holes to connect. Alright, I was not without a little bit of struggle, but I got that screw back in there, and I have 2 screws in over on the right hand side, and the 3rd hole is lined up, so that one would go in too. So that would tie that tray underneath to the back side pieces, and the whole thing gets pretty rigid when you have those connected. Now the next piece is going to start to fill in the end down here, and so we'll get that piece and see if we can put that in there. That piece looks to be number 12. He's going to go in place on the end. These long flanges, 1-inch flanges, this one with a curve, those are going to be on top, on the upper side. There's a flange here on the back that we're going to try and tuck behind the piece that drops down underneath our exhaust manifold on the right hand end. Alright, you're looking down near where the exhaust pipe comes up here, and we're going to see if we can slip this piece in on the end. Reaching around behind the exhaust pipe. There, that went in. The bottom edge of that piece fits inside the flange from the bottom tray that we just put into place. So that piece has a flange that sticks up, and this piece slips down just inside of it. Then we can go out to the outside end and put a screw or 2 in to hold that together. Okay, we're looking down at this piece that we just put in place a minute ago, and I put 3 screws in, and then I realized that I'd done it wrong, and so I took those screws out, lifted the piece out. This outer piece should go inside of the oil line. See if I can show you that oil line. See that silver oil line out there, that shiny one? The piece should run on the inside of that. And in order to get that, I had to kind of spring the piece, slide it inside, start it inside the oil line, get the bottom started inside the flange on the bottom tray here, and flex it out so I could get this tab to go behind this vertical wall here. Essentially, if it went in easy the first time, you probably did it wrong, because this doesn't go in real easy. But it will flex and eventually kind of pop in place when this flange goes inside of this thing, and then it's all good. Now we can go back and put in I won't make you watch me do that, but I'll reach behind with a long screwdriver, get this screw, put a couple in the bottom outside flange, and then that piece is good for now. The next piece I'm going to work with is this large piece, number 16. It's going to come around the grain tank side and go all the way from the bottom tray up to the diesel exhaust catalyst, the thing that looks like a muffler. And you got fingers cut on the edges, top edges of this, and those will probably have to be gently bent out. Don't bend them more than you need to, but bend them out so that they spring up against the diesel exhaust catalyst, the muffler can. And we can tighten them up a little bit later too, but you'll probably have to do that in order to be able to get the bottom part up. And there's a tab on the bottom here that will come up underneath this tray, and there's 4 screw holes there to pull it up from the bottom, and then there's a bunch of screw holes on this end that will go onto the last piece we just put in place. The ones we can reach. There's some things in the way here, we may not be able to reach all those, but that's how you put it on. I'll come back to that after I've put this piece in place and give you any pointers that we uncover in the process of putting it on. Alright, I got that piece in place. I want to point out some peculiarities. These are those sensor lines that come out of the exhaust system there. They probably are nitrogen oxide sensors. And I had to open up a couple of tabs here to relieve pressure on them so that they have a place to come out. You might have to do that. If you do it, you don't want to make any much larger opening than is necessary. We can also fill in over the gaps around there with some of that aluminum tape when we get to the point of finishing this off. But you could probably cut these tabs off and just let those lines come out of the hole there. I've got a filler piece that'll fill in behind it here, so that's not too bad. I would probably try to make a nicer cut than I did here. I just made square tabs here to get this to fit. I'd probably round this out and cut those out and make sure that we don't have sharp edges touching these sensor lines, and then we'll fill in the rest of this with that filler piece and some aluminum tape. I also got screws on underneath here, and as you can see on the end, I put a couple of the screws in place there to hold it for now. You would probably want to put as many screws as you can possibly reach in there to tighten that piece up and put it in place. If we look at the top, notice this comes up here pretty close to the diesel oxidation catalyst. It's loose here because I haven't got it tied on yet, but it'll probably come up like this when we get done, and that's what we want, is for these fingers to close that space up. And if this one doesn't fit tight up against the can, you can bend it in to fit against it if you need to, but wait until we have it tied on to the rest of the pieces in a few minutes. Okay, that's how that piece is going to fit on there. Next piece is number 13 here. 13 is going to fit on the I call it the outside. Fits right in front of me. And this one, if there's an easy one, this is probably it. It fits inside of the piece we just put on, so you have to snake it inside of that. But otherwise it pretty much slips up to the face of the pieces we got here. There's a row of screws around the bottom and a row of screws up this space to hold it on. So I won't make you watch me put screws in, but there's some on the bottom here, and I'll put a few in this vertical face along the turbocharger here. And then I'll tie it together with the last piece we just put on, and then I'll show you that once I get it done. Okay, I'm going to show you how that piece fits in place here. It's just a box-like piece fits up against the face of this. There are screw holes here. I've got about half of them maybe put in. This screw hole here, screw here, this one and this one, tie this piece up to the DOC onto this front face. I've still got a gap here to fill in with that filler piece. I note at the top here, we'll see that how much this tightens up when we put the next piece on, but we may need to bend the top edge of this piece in just a little bit to tighten it up against that DOC can. Okay, we can put this one in place. We have this little fill piece. And with a little bit of luck, I can shoot a screw in here. That one started. Dropped my drill, that's good. Okay. If you look at this, this is going to take a little custom fitting on your part. This piece fits in there without the, of course, without the wires, it fits perfectly. But we've made a opening for the wires to come out, and we would probably maybe enlarge it a little bit or make sure that we've got clearance for the holes. It doesn't have to be a big opening. And then this one may also need a little bit of cutout here and a cutout down here in order to fit around those, but it can help fill in the gap around those lines as well. So trim that to fit. I don't really want to trim this one because I'll take it off this machine, go to a different one, and it'll need different trimming perhaps for that one. But that piece will, 2 screws down here will probably hold it in place. You might be able to get a 3rd screw in either one of these or shoot a new one through. They're self-drilling tapping screws. Shoot one through to get in here between those 2 sensor lines. Make sure that you don't have those lines in a place where you're going to cut them with a sharp edge of tin, but you can fit as close as you want up to that point. Okay, so that's that piece, and that completes the back or the outside of the kit here. Okay, the next piece is this whole top panel, piece number 14 if you like numbers. It's not very conceptually very hard to put in place. I'm going to go down and grab my drill driver, which is at the bottom of the hole. Now you can start wherever you want to, but I'd probably start somewhere around this side of the turbocharger. As you put screws in, going around, it will tie everything together and line up the next screw hole. Some places it may take a little persuading to fit. Like back here, and I'm not sure why. Alright, the last large piece is this piece, number 15, and it'll go underneath the diesel exhaust catalyst, but we're going to have to bend these fingers out. Some more than others. At the side here, probably takes almost the full amount. As you go around here, it probably takes less. So, I have to shoot a couple of screws through over here to tie this side in before we can put that piece on. I'll probably come back to you in just a minute. Okay. Well, remember back at the beginning where I told you that there was a chance that you might want to slide that clamp on the bellows joint or the flex joint or the expansion joint around on this thing to accommodate that. I said on the 8240s we had to do that. Well, it turns out on the 9240s it also wants to hit inside this piece of tin. That takes a 6mm hex wrench or Allen wrench. I loosened that collar up quite a bit, slid it around. It's now running parallel to this space right in here on this side. You could probably bring it all the way around to the back, but I didn't want to do that because I already had this piece on. So I just slid it around and it's loose on there. Now I'll tighten it up when I take this apart. Then I fit this piece in, number 15, squish the fingers out to where they clear the diesel oxidation can. I'll probably squish them back in on any install that I do so that they fit as tight as possible against this. But then I put screws in around here to hold it in place. It'd be nice to get one in the end here too if you possibly can. I don't know if you can get a screwdriver in there to reach it. Another thing I'll point out is this hole accommodated an oil line on the earlier 9240s that had to come over the top and plunge through here. Apparently they changed it, so maybe I don't need that hole anymore. But if you have one with this cut in it and you don't have an oil line that goes through there, I may provide a piece that will screw on over the top of this. We do that with the 8240s because they use the same top deck. But you could also just run a piece of that aluminum foil tape over the top of this and it would prevent us losing air there where we don't need to. I'll try to fix that in future designs if they're going to consistently do that with that thing. So then I've screwed this top piece down intermittently around here. You need, of course, to put in all of the screws. And that will tighten this up. One thing I found out here is I thought these were all 8mm bolt holes in the block. And so these holes they're lined up with holes in the block to pull this whole apparatus tight against the block. My 8mm bolts won't bite in there, so they're like 9 or 10mm bolts. I'll have to send some others with the kit so that you can put those through to pull the tin tight up against the block. Right now it wants to be a little ways away from the block, but I think when we put those bolts in, it'll simply cinch it tight up against there. So that's the installation. After you do that, I would come around and bend all these fingers up as tight as you possibly can to the diesel oxidation catalyst can. I don't want air to get in there, and we aren't going to have a lot of air pressure to leak out around there, so I want it as tight as possible. So close those up so that you don't get any dust in there, because I think the exhaust is hot enough inside this thing to ignite dust. I don't think this is going to get hot enough to ignite that dust. There is also this entry hole here. There's a separate little video section you can watch on how to install a stub entry and a flex collar and then get onto a rubber fitting. In this case, we're probably going to go to this side, the downstream side to me of the oil fill cap, and then shoot out that hole right there alongside your ladder coming up into over the engine to get the air in here or to get out of here with the air tube. So that's the tin installation for a Case 9240. There are places where you may struggle and have to adjust a little bit, but mostly the tin that we had here fits pretty closely. It does pretty much what it was intended to, with some very small modifications or small custom job things that you might have to do, but mostly it fits. It's just a bit of a challenge to fit the pieces together. Now at this point, make sure that you've got all the screws that you can possibly reach put in to hold it together, and then I usually cover up these long lines of screw holes with a strip of that aluminum foil tape, more or less to keep the screw heads locked there, and just in case they want to rattle loose, they won't rattle loose and fall out. It also seals up some of the little holes where the perforations are on the bends and things like that. You can also go around with that aluminum foil tape and plug up any larger holes that you get places where you have gaps around where sensor lines come in or out, or here where this pneumatic line is. I got to put that back on when I take this apart. Looks like I've got a pretty good fit here, but you might want to bend the tin out just a little bit so that it doesn't have a sharp edge against that pneumatic line. So same thing with the oil lines underneath. Make sure you have a little bit of clearance and a smooth surface facing those oil lines where they enter and exit the tin. And then other than that, try to close that up as much as possible. We don't necessarily want it airtight because we want air to flow through it, but we don't want to lose a lot of air out of one spot and then not have air go to the other parts of the box. All right. I encourage you to still be careful and vigilant on your machine, but have a safe harvest.